Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
I want to start with a question. I asked you right now, how many sourced candidates do you need to contact, to engage, to screen, send an interview, to make a placement? Can you answer it? Most recruiters can't, and that's the problem. Here's what happens. I'm notorious for this. I love to set a goal. What's the goal? I need to make 3 placements this quarter. Then we just start working. Source candidates. Get in touch with them. We screen them. We submit them. We hope something works, but we never really know if what we're doing is working, if it's enough. It's not flying blind, but it's not having a process fully dialed in, and that's what I think we can get to. And so there's this gap between what people think they need to do and what they actually need to do, and it's a widening gap. It costs you time, costs you money, costs you placements, costs you opportunity. And so today we're going to close that gap. What we're going to do is work through the math, the actual formulas that you can work backwards from so you understand your goal and you're going to know what exactly do we need to do in order to hit it. So we're going to cover a couple different tracks here, rookies, expert numbers, because most of us are going to live somewhere in between. So you can figure out where you're at in the spectrum. And by the end of this podcast, you're going to have a framework that you can use for any goal, for any role, for any industry. Let's get into it. So we're going to start part 1 with the foundation. What does it take to make one placement? This is the building block for everything else. So for rookies on one side, if you're just getting started, you've never done this before, here's what the math is going to look like. You're probably going to need 10 screening calls in order to get one interview with a hiring manager. It's a 10-to-1 ratio. Then you're probably going to need 10 interviews with that hiring manager that they have in order to get one placement. So another 10-to-1 ratio. So working backwards from that, one placement, that means 10 interviews, which means 100 screening calls. But before you can have those screening calls, you also need to source, contact those candidates. And so to rookie level, once you factor in response rates, having the right contact information, everything else, you're probably going to be aiming for about 600 to 700 people who are sourced and contacted. So let me say that again, 600 to 700 sourced candidates in order to make one placement. That's the rookie math. That's the very beginner side of the spectrum. So now on this side, we have the experts. So you've been doing this for a while. You've got things dialed in. You know what you're looking for. Those numbers are going to shift drastically. You're probably going to need 5 screening calls to get an interview. So a 5-to-1 ratio. And then you're looking at another 5 interviews in order to get a placement. So another 5-to-1 ratio. So working backwards from that, one placement means 5 interviews, which means 5 screening calls. And with this, when you're at the expert level, you usually know your market, who you're working with, what to really look for in a great candidate. So you're probably looking at, after you consider engagement rates, response rates, sourcing people, about 150 to 200 people sourced and contacted. So let's stop on that for just a second. Both of these people, the rookie, the expert, made the placement, but the expert did it with a quarter of the sourcing and the legwork up front. The rookie, 700 source candidates. The expert, 150 source candidates. So same end result, but a wildly different input. And this is the difference between not only knowing what you're doing and what you're not doing, but it's the time value that goes into the people that have been doing this a while. They know what they're after, what it takes to be successful. So now shifting into, okay, you've got that basic math. Now we know what we need to do to make one placement. Let's start to scale it. So let's say you need to make 3 placements in a quarter. So if you're a rookie, 3 placements times 700 source candidates, you need to source 2,100 candidates. Assuming, again, 3 completely different roles. You're not hiring for the same exact thing. So 2,100 source candidates, 3 placements times 100 screening calls. You need 300 screening calls. And then of those 300, you're hoping that the hiring manager, they're going to have about 30 interviews. So you're looking at over here, to make 3 placements in a quarter, 2,100 people to source, 300 screening calls. Now, if you're on the expert side of it, you've got 3 placements, 150 source candidates. So you're looking at 450 source candidates, 3 placements, 25 screening calls each, 75 screening calls in total. And then that's going to lead to 5 interviews by the hiring manager, 15 that they're going to have. So you're looking at over here, 450 people to source, to engage, and 75 screening goals. So again, same goals, but 1,650 fewer sourced candidates for the expert and 225 fewer screening calls. Wild gap. And again, this is looking at the two ends of the spectrum. Beginner, expert. Most of us are living somewhere in between here. So there are going to be some caveats to this. If you pick up a different type of role, you pick up, instead of a general or a mid-level position, you're working on an executive role, or you're looking for a very niche role in a local area that you haven't done, the math is going to change. Exec is going to have a completely different ratio structure, fewer candidates, interviews happen differently. Say you're in a specialized niche, ratios are completely different. Say you're one of the examples that Viv talked about the other day, you're competing in a VMS system where hundreds of recruiters are working for the same job order. Two wildly different scenarios. So just remember, your numbers are not going to be the same as the person sitting next to you, even if you're both experts, even if you're both rookies. There are some variables that come into play here, but this is where it's important to know your numbers. And that's what we're going to get into with this next part. So how do we figure out what are actually my numbers on this wide ranging spectrum? So we're going to track three different things. First is going to be your screening to interview conversion rate. And again, go listen back to the last 4 Tactical Tuesday episodes, or before the one where we were talking about the ghosting formula, about the screening to interview conversion rate. That's all coming from the 4-part series that we did on ratios. Go listen to that. What we're doing here is we're consolidating everything into one place so you can run your math, but she unpacks in there a lot of how do we get to these numbers. But first thing here, how many screening calls are you having to get one interview with a hiring manager? You a 10-1, a 7-1, a 5-1. Track it. Just write it down. Look over the last month, the last quarter, this last year. How many screening calls did you do? Of those, how many turned into interviews? Write that down. And also make note of any instances where it may have been a little bit different. Like we said, if you're working an exec role versus a mid-level, if you're working in a very different niche, if you're working in a different region, track that. Averages are good, but once you start figuring out also your sweet spot, when you know your numbers, you might find out, man, I could be doing half the work if I focus on this specific segment. So that's part one. Second, you're going to want to know your interview to placement conversion rate. So of those interviews that you send the candidates onto, how many became placements? Is it 10? Is it 6? Is it 3? Again, write it down. Last one is your sourcing efficiency. So when you make a placement, how many people did you need to source to get in there? Track this backwards all the way from your placements. You will probably find there's going to be some different numbers in there. The other big variable as part of that it could honestly be a fourth one, is looking at your response efficiency. So when you do source the right people, what's your response rate? How are you getting people to reply back to you? So those are I said 3. Those are probably the big 4 that you should really be looking at, but you can measure all of those. They're going to change over time. It's never going to be set in stone. But what you want to do is document it, because this is what you're going to use as the groundwork for understanding where you're at today, what do you want to do to improve, and how are you understanding if I actually am or am not getting better as part of this. And so you've got your numbers, you know what you're going after. So now we get into let's move forward. Let's come up with a plan. So let's do, what do I need to do daily, weekly in order to hit this target? So because you need to make 100 screening calls for one placement, but what does that look like in the day-to-day? So let's say you need to make one placement and your ratio is 100 screening calls are required. So if you can realistically call it 5 screening calls per day with notes, with follow-ups and all the work that goes into it, that's probably a realistic number. You're going to need 20 total days of screening activity in order to hit that benchmark. But you can't do 20 days worth of screens if you have 0 candidates. So you need to backload that sourcing first. And so if you need 100 screening calls, you know that we're going to need to reach 600 people in order to get there. And then you have sourcing happening before the screening phase. So this is how you can plan. That's a lot though. That's tough when we're talking about, okay, if I need to have 100 screenings, do I go and source all these people? Do I split it up? So one thing you could do is you could source a batch of candidates. Say you source 100 to get started. Then you start getting them into the sequence, have some screening calls scheduled, and have those screening calls in flight. And then once those screens are going, start your next batch of sourcing. Keep it a pipeline. Keep it moving. It's not just get a bunch of source, step, go and have screenings, step, but keep it fluid. So that's one way that you can work through all this, especially given that it might take a while. And so once you know your activity targets, then you can start to plan out your week. Hey, this week I'm going to source 150 candidates. I'm going to have 15 screening calls, and I'm going to submit 3 people for interviews. So this then becomes your weekly activity plan. It's not vague. It's not, hey, yeah, I'm going to do some sourcing and I'll be successful. This is how you get to concrete, specific numbers to understand what you need to do in order to be successful. You know, with me, there's always nuance. There's always variables at play here. So when you look at what we've covered here today, 600 to 700 candidates sourced for rookies, 150 to 200 for experts. These are baselines, right? Your numbers are going to be different. Like we've said, by role, by region, by the type, by the niche, anything else. It's going to be different. That's okay. That is okay because, as we all know, recruiting doesn't exist in a vacuum. But again, we just want to document and benchmark what are your average numbers because you are going to exist on that spectrum somewhere. So that is the biggest takeaway that you can have is understanding where you live and having it be grounded in reality a little bit, because some of us might think that we're much better than we are. Some of us might think that we're much worse than we are. It's understanding and finding where you live and all of that. That's what this is all going to root us in reality for it. So here's what we've covered. Like, you've got your math today. One placement requires a certain number of screening calls, which requires a certain number of candidates that you've engaged that have replied, which requires a certain number of candidates who've been sourced for it. Multiply that by the number of placements you need to hit your goal. 5 over the course of a quarter, 5 over the course of the year, whatever that may be. And you can break that down into daily, weekly activities for yourself. This is how you stop flying blind. This is how you set a plan. This is how you hit your goals. It's how you know you're doing enough. And more importantly, it's how you know what enough looks like. I know where everyone's always like, oh, that's good enough. That's enough. The volume is enough. It's like, what is enough? Well, now you've got a concrete number. So I don't usually give homework. If you listen to this, I'm going to give you a little piece of homework. Your assignment this week, go out and figure out your numbers. If you're listening to this episode when it first drops, it is the end of 2025. So this is going to be a great time to get yourself set up for a strong 2026 performance. So figure out your numbers, track your screening to interview ratio, track your interview to placement ratio, work backwards from your last placement, last one, last quarter, last year, all of them. Figure out how many people you had to source for and then multiply it. What do 3 placements look like for you? What's hitting your quarterly goal look like? What's hitting your annual goal look like? Know your math, own the math. And if you want a step-by-step workbook that's going to walk you through all this so you can build your own custom activity plan, we're going to be releasing that soon as well. Keep your eyes out. Might come out in the beginning of 2026. We'll see. Or just reach out to us. Happy to walk you through it live on a call. I'll do it. We've got other team experts, Vivian, Nat, the whole team. We're excited to help you with this. We want you to be successful at the end of the day. So stay tuned for that. Reach out to us if you're curious. podcast@loxo.co. But otherwise, hope this is a helpful one. This is one of our last episodes before we all wrap for the holidays. If you're listening when these drop, hope you have a good holiday season, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you all in 2026. All right. Bye, y'all.